In this video, we'll take a look at an introduction to working with bones and joints in LightWave. I'd like to dedicate this video to Matt Gorner, who deep down at the base root, he's a rigger. He just doesn't know it yet. And so first, let's start off by talking about bones and joints. Well, bones and joints do have the same function. They just work differently, and we'll be exploring that along the way. But their purpose is to deform a mesh. So you place bones or joints inside of a mesh. And so in this case, this is one seamless mesh, this character here. Okay, and if I select this bone and rotate it, only a portion of that mesh is going to be affected. So I can select multiple bones, and so now I'm shaping this this tail by moving and rotating the bones that are going to be driving the mesh. Now, bones and joints aren't limited to organic meshes that are all seamless. You can place them in vehicles and hard surface models as well, and have them drive, say, opening up doors and trunks and cars and things, but primarily they're used for organic seamless meshes. Okay, with that, let's go ahead and dive in and start creating some bones and joints and take a look at how we go about creating those. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and clear this scene out. And let's go ahead and move to 4 windows. So right now I'm working with one window. I find when I'm working with bones or joints, I like to have multiple windows. I feel like I have more control over where I'm placing them. And also, it does depend on which window you draw in of how that's going to affect the rotation of the joints and bones. So for starters, I'm going to go ahead and hit D for display options, and for viewport layout, I'm just going to choose quad. The other thing I like to do whenever I'm working with rigs, like setting up bones and joints, is I like to go ahead and get rid of the light in the camera temporarily so that they're not in the way. So I'm just going to go over to the scene editor. I'm going to slide that over here, and I'm going to lock and hide. Okay, for right now, I'm not going to load in a mesh. We'll do that here in a few, but what I'm going to do is just add a null, and we're just going to call this character. Okay, and we'll just place it right there. Okay, and then I'm going to move over to the back view. Just it doesn't matter really which view, but I want an ortho view and not the perspective or camera view. Okay, so I've got an object and I want to place bones in it, and to do that I need to head over to the setup tab. Now we get to the setup tab, and right now I've got my layout window kind of small just for recording, but it would be even more daunting to look at when you're first getting in there if these items were also there, but they get collapsed up into the more. So you go to the setup tab and you go, man, look at all these tools. I'm never going to be able to rig. Well, Matt, yes you will. You just need to take a look and kind of get the lay of the land. So the first thing that we need to understand is we need to add bones or joints, and then we come over here to this add group, and I'd like to focus on that for right now, because we get to the add and we go, holy smokes, look at all these options. I just want to add some bones or joints, and I've got bone, joint, child joint, draw bones, then I got draw joints, I got draw child bones, draw child joints, and convert skelegons into bones. What are skelegons? Well, we'll figure that out. Okay, so let's start with the basic, add a bone. When you go add bone, it allows you to name it, and I would suggest to name your bones so that when you have, say, I don't know, 60 bones in an object, you know what they are, and it's not just bone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so in this case, I'm just going to call this COG, which is center of gravity. It's a very common place to start with rigging, and hit OK. And it places it, let's go to multiple windows here. It places it right at the pivot point of my object, right at the base here. So in this case it's 0, 0, 0, and it draws the bone for me. Okay, so if I go and add bone, it puts it in the exact same place. So if you ever want to just start off by adding a bone, well, and you want it at the base here, then you would use add bone. Now if you want to put them in specific places, nothing stops you from, once they're there, moving it. Okay, but what we do need to know is that we need to rest the position, and we'll get into that, because basically the idea is that we've keyframed it in that location, but it knows that its original location was here. So when we go to use the bones, if this was in a mesh, it is going to move this move the geometry that it would be affecting. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of those bones, and let's do child bone. Okay, it looks like it does the same as bone because there were no bones. It is a child of the object. And you will not have, if we don't, let me get rid of this, and if we were to just go to lights, notice that the add options are ghosted. You need an object in order to work with bones. So you can't just start creating bones without objects. They are children of the object that you're creating them for. Okay, so if we were to click child bone, it is the child of this. If we click it again, it will be the child of the selected bone. Okay, so if we want to quickly add bones, let's do this. I'm going to get rid of that and get rid of that, and let's add a bone. And then say I want to add a bunch of child bones. Well, we can see here equals. So if I go equals, enter, equals, equals, enter, and I'm just doing one right after the other. And so now I've got a bone chain. So I've got, if we look at this, I've got the parent, and of course the ultimate parent. If we go to the scene editor and take a look, the ultimate parent is the object. And then I've got all these children bones underneath it. Okay, so I can use add bone or add child bone to add it, but if you notice when I'm adding it, it's placing it. I don't have control over placing it. So unless I'm just doing a quick little bone chain like this, I rarely use bone or child bone, add bone or add child bone. Okay, so let's go ahead and get rid of all of those. So I'm just gonna say yes to all and get rid of those. Okay, so now we know how to create a bone and a child bone. Well, what about joint and child joint? Well, if I click joint, it's going to be the joint right here. So I've got one joint. If I say child joint, I get a child joint off of that. So it works the same. We do need to know the difference between bone and joint, but for right now, we at least know what bone, add child bone, add joint, and add child joint does. So we have a way of going and at least adding them to a mesh. We need more control. We need to be able to place them where we want them, and we'll take a look at that. But let's start by taking a look at the ultimate difference of a bone and a joint. So if we look at what we have here, we actually have two joints. We have, if we look down here, joint 1 and joint 2. Now if I select this right here, this is really just a connection between the two joints. It's not actually selecting one of the joints. Well, it is. It's selecting joint 2. So if we click here, you see joint 2. And if we click here, we see joint 2. So know that when you click this, it's the same as clicking this. Okay, so we need to know that so that when we get into some of the other tools, it'll save some confusion. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to my object, and I'm going to add a bone. And I'm going to move it up just so we can see the difference. And let's go into the side view. Okay. So this shape and this shape, very similar. So they look the same, except when I have this, this isn't one bone and then the tip is another. This whole thing is the bone. Okay, so we've got two joints here to represent what we're seeing here. So each one of these can move and rotate independent. This is one, so moving and rotating is going to affect this entire shape. Okay, so now that we know that, and we'll later see how we can use joints in some cases of bones. They both do the same thing, they just work differently, and you decide. And you can actually blend them. You can have in one rig, you could have bones and joints. You don't have to go one way or the other, which is interesting, and it frees you and allows you to work the way you want to work. I would say that right now the way I've been working is I either go all bones or all joints, but you can mix them. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that, get rid of that, and get rid of that. And let's take a look at the way I usually create bones and joints, and it's one of the other options, or some of the other options I should say. So we know about bone, joint, and child joint. We have draw bones. Okay, now if I use draw bones, I click and drag. Now right there I started in the same place. I'm going to get rid of that, and I'm going to say draw bones, and I'm going to do it here. So it doesn't have to be created right at the base of the object. I can go and draw bones wherever I want. Now with the draw bones still active, if I go, I could draw a bunch of bones. Now all the bones that I'm creating, let's take a look at the scene editor. All of them are children of the object, okay, but it's not a hierarchy where the newer bones are part of, are children of some of the other bones. They're all on the same level, so they're all underneath the object here. Okay, so that's draw bones. So you could quickly draw a bunch of bones and put them exactly where you want them. Let's go ahead and remove those. I'll say yes to all. And now I'm going to go to draw joints. Well, actually, let's skip and go to draw child bones. Okay, so draw child bones, when I click and drag, I can drag it anywhere I want. Now, with it still active, the next one that I draw, no matter where I click, it's going to be a child of the last bone. So I'm actually creating, let's go to the scene editor, and we can see it's the first bone that I drew is the child of the character, and then of course 2 is to 1, 3 is to 2, 4 is to 3. So I get an actual chain where this bone is the child of this bone, and so on. Okay. So what I could do, now why would I use now I used draw child joints and I didn't draw a bone first? Well, because it's going to be the child of the parent. Now if I want to create a new chain and I don't want it to be a child of this, what I'll need to do is select the object, go over to, instead of draw child bones, I'm going to go over to draw bones, draw my first bone, then go over to draw child bones so that I can draw children off of that. If I were to have had this selected and I moved around and I rotated and things like that, and then I said, okay, I want to draw a new chain, if I go and start drawing child bones, I'm going to draw a child off of that. Now, the same thing goes if I have this bone selected and I use draw child bone, it's going to be a child of that. So why would you use draw bones over child bones? Well, it depends. Do you want to start a new chain? If you want to start a new chain, then you're going to need to draw bones, but then you'll want to switch to draw child bones so that it can still be part of it. Now, if we look at this, now this is a child of this bone. If I move it, it's still a child of that bone. If I rotate this, that whole chain's going to move, except it's separated. Now this is going to be something that we're going to see different with joints. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm just going to get rid of these, and I'm going to, with the object selected, I'm going to come over to draw joints. Now just like draw bones, I'm drawing a bunch of joints. Well, this is of course one joint and two joints, so it does have children already, but if I go over to the scene editor, okay, we'll see that I've got a bunch of joints that are children of the character. Okay, so let me go ahead and I'm just going to get rid of those. And let's go ahead and take a look at using draw child joints. Same as draw child bones, but these are going to be joints. Now the difference is if I go and select, say, this one, and I start to move it, you can see that it doesn't break this, because remember, this is just a visual representation. All that's really important are the joints. So I'm able to move it, but we have them still connected, because this will never break. It's the connection point. It's just showing us that these are connected. So it'll always still be a child, but I can move it. Okay, so that's the big difference that you can see with drawing joints and drawing bones and drawing child joints and drawing child bones, is that do you want to, if you're wanting to use joints, you're going to see that as you move them, we need to we can see the connection. If it were a bone, we saw earlier, it breaks away. Okay, so now we know about drawing bones and joints and the different ways and why there are these different ones, because it is important that we have these different options so that we have full control over placing them. There's one last one that we haven't covered, which is convert skelegons into bones. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to clear the scene, and I'm going to hop over to Modeler, and I've got a character loaded up. I'm going to go to W for statistics and go over to polygon mode, and I'm going to see that I already have skelegons in here, which I'm going to get rid of. Okay, And I'm going to go over to layer 2. Now, in the end, you want your skelegons to be in the same layer as the object that you want them to be part of. But the way I usually work is, just to keep things simple, is that I work in another layer and then copy them over. So I'll go to the Setup tab, just like we have a Setup tab in Layout, we have a Setup tab in Modeler. And I'm going to create skelegons. And very similar to in Layout, I'm going to draw out the skelegons. Okay, so I can use modeling tools like drag and readjust these and move and rotate and all the like right here I can see it's not in the arm in the top view, so T for move, just move it back. And then once I have them the way I want them, I'm going to cut, paste, and now they're in there. Save, and I'm going to send this over to Layout. Okay, let's turn this to texture shaded solid, and I'm going to turn bone x-ray on. Okay, so where are my skelegons? I made them. Well, skelegons are just placeholders for bones. Okay, so knowing that, I need to tell it, hey, I want to do something with that information, because right now it's just information. So I come over to Setup with this object selected that has the skelegons in it that I want to convert. I come over to Add, Convert Skelegons into Bones, and it lets me know that the 5 skelegons got converted into 5 bones. And there we are right there. Now, if you want these to be joints instead of bones, you could select them, hit P for properties, and right here under bone type, Z-axis bones, I'm going to change them to joint. And now they're joints. Okay, so you can still use skelegons when you're wanting to use joints, just know that you're going to want to do that conversion. Okay, so one last thing, and I'll feel like we've got a pretty good grasp over the add options here. Okay, I'm going to clear the scene and go over to say the back view right here. I'm going to add a null, so Control N, and I want to see what happens if I draw a bone in the back view versus drawing a bone. Let's change this one to say the right view. I'm going to draw a bone in the right view, and I'm going to draw a bone in the top view. And then I'm going to select all of them and hit Y for rotate, because what I want you to see is that the bone that I drew in the back view, look at the pitch, and then look at the pitch for the bone that I drew in the top view and the bone that I drew in the right view. And you'll notice the direction that the pitch is running down. So this is what I was saying about it being important about which window you draw in. So if you're working and you know you want the knee to have the pitch running this way, you'd want to draw the knee in, well, in the case of a character facing down the Z, it would be in the right view. In this case, the knee would need to bend this way. So as you can see, by drawing it at either the top view or the right view, the knee would work great. Now, you'll want to, we can always go and use some of the modify tools, but I have found that it's easier to place the bones in the proper, bones or joints in the proper window to get the rotational axis the way you want. From the beginning, so that you don't have to go and make any changes. So what you'll want to do before you get deep into rigging is you are going to want to spend some time, just practice. Just say, if I want the pitch to be running in this down this axis, I think it's supposed to be here, and do a little practicing. And once you've gone through the practice, then you should have a pretty good idea. You might find yourself making the wrong choice, but you can always undo or just get rid of the bone or the joint and draw it again. Or we'll learn about modify tools later. But just so you know, there is a way to know before you ever start. You can know which direction that pitch is going to be facing, and that is by choosing the correct window. So okay, that's just a brief look at the add options. We will be covering more, but my suggestion to you would be take a break, go and work with just adding bones, and do what I did. Just draw a null, add those bones and joints, and get used to working with these various options, because again, it is important that we have all these options. You'll find at some point one of these is going to be the exact one that you need. My suggestion is I always use draw child joints and draw child bones until I need to break into a new hierarchy. I like drawing the bones unless I'm doing like I showed earlier, where you just want to make a quick chain, whether you're working on rope or chains or whatever. So again, just a brief look at the add options, and get those down, and then come back and we'll take a look at more. Now that you've had some time with the add tools and under the setup tab, let's take a look at some of the modify tools. Okay, so now I've placed the bones, but I want to adjust them. Maybe they're not exactly where I'd like them to be. So we can use some of the modify tools. Now, my suggestion for using joint move and tip move would be, instead of having some of the bones or joints selected, would be to move over to the base character, then choose joint move, and what we'll see is that we have access, we have handles for all the different bones or joints. So I could just move this up, and then whenever I hit the spacebar to commit, we can see that we've adjusted the connection point there. Okay, if these were, let's go to properties and change those to joints, and if we were to select the base object and use joint move, we can move this joint, and we can have that. Now, the interesting thing is we could select this joint without using joint move, hit T for move, and move it. But you notice the child joint goes with it, which is going to look very similar to something else. The other thing we need to know is that if we don't use joint move or tip move, when we do move this, we're not actually done. We need to rest it, and we'll talk about resting in a second, but just be aware of that, because what's happening with joint move and tip move is when you're done with them and you commit, it actually rests them. We just don't see it. It's just happening behind the scenes. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the object, and actually let me select the joints, and I'm going to go P for properties and change them to Z-axis. Okay, and we'll see that where we did those moves, it's broken, because with bones we don't have those connections that never break, or that like with joints they'll never break. With bones they will break. So let me go ahead and just get rid of these, and we'll add some new ones. So I'm just going to use equal, enter, equal, enter, equal, enter, equal, enter. Okay, and I'm going to select the object, and I'm going to move over to tip move. Okay, so with tip move, if I grab one of these handles, it will grab that handle and it will move the entire hierarchy that follows. So all the children will follow. When I commit, you'll see that that's the case. So if I go to joint move and move, say, this, it's just moving where those two connect. If I use tip move, it's moving where I'm grabbing the handle and the entire hierarchy. So two completely different ways of moving it. Remember, if we're working with joints, it's just like working with tip move. If we move one of the joints, it will move that joint and the entire hierarchy underneath it. So we now know that we don't really need tip move if we're working with joints, but tip move comes in very handy when working with bones. Joint move, we need for joints, because if we don't want the entire hierarchy to move, and we need them for bones as well. So joint move would be good for both joints and bones. Tip move, you could use tip move on joints. There's really no reason to, because moving a joint works just like tip move. So tip move is good for both, although moving a joint is like tip move minus resting, which we'll get into. Okay, so bone twist. What's bone twist all about? If I go to Y for rotate, we'll see the direction that the pitch is going in. Now, if I take this bone right here and use bone twist on it, let me go into another window so that I can grab this handle and rotate it. See how the pitch is now rotating? So if I go to Y, we'll see that the pitch didn't rotate here. It rotated on this one. Okay, because we're using a parent coordinate system, and that threw me off the first time that I went to work with it. So just know that if you're going to use bone twist and you have under modify coordinate system parent, you'll twist the parent and it will end up twisting the rotational handles on the child. So that's bone twist, and of course that will work with joints as well. So let's go back over to setup and take a look at scale hierarchy. So if I go back to, say, this bone and use scale hierarchy, I can scale, and it'll scale the entire hierarchy from where I'm selecting and all the children underneath it. So that's good if you've loaded in a rig that works with, if you've used the import rig and you need to size up the entire rig to fit your character, well, there's a good use for it right there, is the scale hierarchy. Okay, so let's take a look at some more modify options. Okay, we have align pitch. So if we have the pitch like this, and we say align pitch, you'll see that it's adjusted the child. So if we had an entire chain, we could go align pitch, align pitch, align pitch, align pitch, and it would go and align each one of them to its parent, so that we could get all of the, if we did bone twist, or if we just wanted to get all of the pitch axis the same way, then we can go ahead and use align pitch, which is very useful. Okay, if we come over to record pivot rotation, if we've gone and ended up with gimbal lock in some way, which if you watch the, well, let's just go ahead and do it. Instead of having you hop over to a new video, I'm just going to get rid of this setup right here, and let's get a setup that's going to have some gimbal lock. So what I'm going to do is draw some, we'll just do child bones, and I'm going to draw, say, the hip, the thigh, and the calf or the lower leg. If I look at this bone right here with Y, we'll see that the bank and the heading, if I were to pitch it like this, I've got gimbal lock, you'll see that both of those axes are lining up with each other, which means I'm losing one of them. So what I can do is I can record pivot rotation. So if I go over to setup, modify, more, orientation, record pivot rotation, you'll see that it resets that so that I get a nice clean setup for my heading and bank. So that would be a good use of record pivot rotation. Now the next one in the list is record bone rest position. That's when I was saying we needed to rest the bones. And the best way that I can show this is to clear the scene, go over to modeler, and I've got this little tube object, and I'm going to take it over to layout. So send object to layout. And let's just go to, I'm just going to change it to texture shaded solid, and we can work in the top view. That's fine. So say I go over to setup and I draw some child bones like so, and I go, oh, I need to move this. So I'm going to grab this object and I'm going to go to, let's go to setup, tip move, and I'm going to move it into place and hit spacebar. Okay, so let me go to bone x-ray so we can see. So I'm fine. If I go and turn bones on, and I rotate, all is well. Now say I decide that I want it moved, so I'm going to go to, I'm just going to move the bone, so T for move, and I'm going to move it. Okay, and I'm going to turn bones off. Okay, so I have it moved there. Now, if I turn bones on, this is going to move over because it knows that its original location is here, but with auto key on, I've keyframed it to a new location. So it knows that. But if I go to modify, more, orientation, rest position, I'm saying this is where its position really is, not just where it's been keyframed, and you'll see that the geometry is not correct. So if I go, oh, I want to fix that, so let me turn bones off, and I'm going to move that into place, and I go, okay, all is well, right? It's keyframed into place, everything's good. So let's go to bones on. Whoa, what's going on with my mesh? It's all going crazy. Well, it's because this bone is controlling part of this mesh, and since I've keyframed it into that location, it's not right. But if I hit R for rest position, record rest position, then I'm fine. So that's a really important modify tool that you need to be aware of, is the record bone rest position. You're telling it this is where by default on frame 0, this is where the bone's home is, and I can keyframe it wherever I want, but this is definitely where the bone is. Okay, now if you've used record pivot rotation or record bone rest position and you want to get rid of that, you can remove pivot position and remove RPR, which is going to go back to what the default is. So if you ever want to get back to what the original setup was, you'd want to use those two options. Okay, so that's a quick look at the modify options under the setup tab in layout. Okay, so I feel like we're getting a grasp on this. We've got the add tools, we got the modify. Let's take a look at some of these other options under, say, detail. So what I'll do is I'll draw some child bones, and then I'm going to draw a joint, and then I'm going to draw some child joints off of that. Okay, and so let's say I decided that I wanted 2 bones here, or let's just say 3 bones or more instead of this 1 bone. Well, I could redraw it. I could use joint move and tip move and start moving this stuff, or I could have this bone selected and I could say bone split. How many bones do I want? Well, I could do 2, or let's do 3 just to change it from default. And now I've got 3 bones in the place of that 1, and they'll have the same property information, P for properties. So if I had a weight map or things like that, it would have the same values. Okay, so you would think if I select here that the same thing would happen, but let's think back to what we talked about earlier. What we talked about earlier was that when I select this, look down here, joint 3 is the same as this joint. So if I have this selected, let's go ahead and do it, and I use bone split, and we'll just do 2 for right now. Okay, it adds it to the end here. So let me go to display options and handles and icons, and let's just do all the bones the same size and size them down, and then we're going to grab this T for move and move it over here. So that could throw you off if you're like, well, I'm just going to grab this joint and I'm going to split it. So what you really have to do is grab this joint if you want to split here and use bone split to, and there you go. You get the extra handle there, T for move, and I'm just going to move these into place where I want. Remember that moving joints is like tip move. Okay, so I could have used joint move if I wanted to just move this one. But so the idea is that you need to make sure that when you're selecting joints and you're going to be using something like bone split, you want to select the right joint. When you select this item right here, it's the same as this item. Okay, so this is just a connector between the two. So when you're selecting this, you're actually selecting this. So keep that in mind when especially when using bone split, or you'll end up with a if you want to have one come right off of this, if you select this, it will. But if you select this, it's going to actually be in between here. Okay, so we need to keep that in mind. Okay, so that's bone split. Now bone connect, let's go ahead and I'm going to draw another bone. So I'm going to say draw bones. I'm just going to draw this here. Now bone connect, if I select this bone and select this bone and go bone connect, it gives me some options. Do I want to just snap first, this will become the parent of this. Do I want to just snap to the base there? Do I want to snap the child over to this? Do I want to create a new bone in between? Okay, or do I want to just parent it in place where it wouldn't create anything? So I'm just going to say create a new bone in between. Okay, and hit OK, and there we go. Got a new bone in between. So some options there, but that's bone connect, a way that we can go in and start working with our rig, with our bones, and adding and reparenting and things like that. Now, if I select multiple bones and I want them to just be one bone, so bone fuse, and you can only do 2 at a time, so I'm going to fuse these together and make one bone. Okay, so it's the bone fuse is the exact opposite of bone split. So bone split, you're taking one bone and making multiple bones, and bone fuse, you're taking multiple bones and making one bone. And then if I want to unparent this from this, I'll just unparent bone, and now when I rotate, it doesn't rotate this because it's no longer a child of this. So it's a quick way of unparenting that setup. Okay, so that's a quick look at some of the detail options or the detail options under the setup tab in layout. So now we should have a pretty good handle on the majority of the tools in the setup tab. There are a few others that are kind of self-explanatory, like copy hierarchy. Well, if I had one leg and I wanted to copy it to put up on this front leg, well, I could use copy hierarchy, and it's going to keep the goals and targets and things like that. Mirror hierarchy, I set up one side, I can mirror over. Rename hierarchy if I want to go in and rename it. And then import and export rigs allows you to export out a setup and save it off to a file that you can then import into another object and use your joint move and tip move and bone twist and things like that to get it into shape of the new object, and then it saves you some time on rigging. And then of course we have delete hierarchy and delete bone, so some more options there under edit. But my suggestion would be start diving into the main tools, especially the add, and then of course when you want to modify and split and connect and fuse and things like that. Okay, so my first suggestion after exploring these tools would be to take a look at the inchworm rigging video. It's a good beginner tutorial for rigging and will allow you to get your feet wet a little bit, and then tackle something like a quadruped like this. But I would suggest going after a biped, just a character that's got 2 arms and 2 legs and a head and a torso, and rig that. Don't worry so much about inverse kinematics in the beginning. First, just get it so that you have an armature, just basic bone setup so that you can pose like a stop motion artist would pose, and then take the plunge into setting up inverse kinematics. And then of course we can take it to all kind of levels with sliders and expression and things like that. But first get your feet wet, learn how to place bones and get the setup that you want, and then move towards that. So hopefully this has given you an idea of working with some of the base tools of bones and joints, and will allow you to go in and start rigging some of your characters or objects.